In the heart of an old village tucked beneath the rustling shadows of baobab trees, lived a man whose name echoed like a ghost in the wind. His story was told only at firesides, half in whispers, half in warnings. He was the man who gave up his only land. Not for wealth, not for fame, but to raise children who weren't his. 20 years passed. Then they returned. But not as children. And not without a secret that chilled the soul of the entire village. Kabiro was once a respected man in Nyumba, a village nestled on the edge of a dense, whispering forest known as Nyumba, the forest of blood. The land he owned stretched wide, lush with cassava and maize. His ancestors had tilled it, bled on it, prayed on it. But Kabiro had no children. His wife, Wanja, had died during childbirth years ago, and the child didn't make it through the night. Since then, Kabiro lived in solitude, with nothing but the land and his memories to warm him. The village often spoke of his silence. They called him the hollow tree, rooted but empty. He barely smiled, except when children passed by his homestead. That was his weakness, the laughter of little ones. One dry season, hunger swept through Nyumba like a curse. Disease followed. Parents perished. Children wandered aimlessly, their bellies swollen with hunger, eyes lost in shock. The chief, unable to care for them all, decreed that every household should take in at least one orphan. Many resisted. Kabiro didn't. Instead, he came to the village square and said, "I will take them all." At first, the villagers laughed. Oh, there were 11 orphan children. He had no wife, no help. But Kabiro didn't flinch. That same week, he sold his farmland to a traveling trader named Muntu, a man who wore white robes and had a tongue as smooth as shea butter. "I need the money to raise the children," Kabiro told the village chief. Muntu grinned. A noble heart in a foolish man's chest. Kabiro ignored him. He built a long hut on the edge of the forest, raised by his own hands, using what little money remained after the sale. He named it Nyumba Ya Roho, the house of spirit. He fed the orphans, clothed them, sang lullabies even though his voice cracked like dry wood, told stories under the moonlight, stories his grandmother once told him, tales of shapeshifters, moon children, and ancestral watchers who lived beneath the baobabs. The children laughed. They flourished. They grew. But Kabiro grew thin, tired, worried. He never complained. Among the 11 children, one stood out, a girl named Mwikali. She had eyes too wise for her age. Always silent, always watching. When Kabiro told stories, Mwikali never laughed. She listened. She remembered. At night, when the other children slept, Mwikali would sometimes sit by the edge of the forest, humming a melody no one recognized. She claimed her mother taught her that song, before the fire took her home and her voice. One evening, Mwikali told Kabiro, "There are things in the forest that speak without mouths." Kabiro paused. "What do they say?" "They ask who you are," Mwikali said, "and why you live on land that was never yours." Kabiro chuckled nervously. "This land has always been ours. My grandfather tilled it." "No," she said, her voice low. "The land before yours. The part you gave up." Kabiro's heart stuttered. The children didn't know about the deal. He'd never told them about the land he sold, the heart of his inheritance. That land now belonged to Muntu, the trader. Yet somehow Mwikali knew. "Go to bed," Kabiro said. But that night Kabiro couldn't sleep. He sat outside Nyumba Ya Roho, staring into the shadows of Nyumba. The trees swayed gently, but not with wind. It was a movement too deliberate, too rhythmic, like something breathing. A year passed. Then two. The children thrived. Some villagers began to help Kabiro, offering food and clothing. Others still called him mad. Then one afternoon Muntu returned. His white robes were now faded gray, his eyes hollow like dried wells. He came not with trade but with a message. "I am leaving," Muntu said. Kabiro frowned. "Why?" "The land you gave me. Something is wrong with it. Kabiro's throat tightened. Wrong how? Crops won't grow. Goats wander into the fields and die standing. I hear drumming at night. Kabiro remained quiet. Munta leaned closer. What did you bury there? Nothing, Kabiro whispered. Munta shook his head. Then why do I see shadows moving across the maze, even when the moon is full? Kabiro said nothing. The orphans watched the exchange from the hut. Mwikali stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on Muntu. Later that night, Mwikali came to Kabiro and whispered, "He doesn't belong here. And he has taken what he shouldn't." Kabiro asked, "What did he take?" Mwikali looked at the stars and said, "The silence of the land." It came one night, a red moon rising like an open wound in the sky. The elders called it an omen. The dogs wouldn't bark. The birds refused to sing. That night, Kabiro woke to find Mwikali standing over him. "It's time," she said. "For what?" "For them to speak." Before he could respond, there was a sound outside, low and thunderous like earth groaning. The children were already awake, standing by the door as if they were waiting for something. Kabiro stepped outside. In the distance, toward the land he had sold, fires had erupted. Not flames of destruction, ritual fires. Circles of them, dancing. Figures stood between them, tall, slender, unmoving. Kabiro blinked, but they were gone. He rubbed his eyes. Mwikali whispered, "They are watching. They never stopped." "Who?" But she didn't answer. The next morning, Muntu was found on the path outside the village. Open. Mouth agape. No wound. No blood. Clutched in his hand was a piece of parchment with one word scrawled in charcoal. "Return." The chief called a gathering. Some said Kabiro was cursed. Others believed the land had always been forbidden. But Kabiro stayed quiet. He returned to his hut, watched the children play, but he noticed something had changed. They whispered more, moved in sync. And Mwikali. She began carving symbols onto the wooden walls of Nyumba Ya Roho, ancient symbols. Symbols Kabiro had seen once long ago, in his grandmother's hidden basket of bones. When he asked what they meant, Mwikali simply said, "We are remembering who we are." Kabiro stared at her. And for the first time, he was afraid. In the days after Munta's death, the village changed. Women stopped going to the rivers after dusk. Men began marking their doors with charcoal crosses. Children were not allowed near the edges of Ingombe Damu. But Nyumba Ya Roho remained oddly untouched. Quiet. Alive. Almost too alive. Kabiro started noticing things. The children no longer ate food he cooked. They would smile politely, take the bowls, but he'd later find them untouched beneath the bamboo beds. They no longer played during the day. They stayed inside, whispering among themselves in a strange tongue. Not Kiswahili, not Kikuyu, not any language Kabiro knew. And Mwikali. She was no longer just a child. Her eyes were deep. Too deep. Like staring into a well that had no bottom. Kabiro walked to the home of Nyakoko, the oldest woman in the village, said to be over 100 years old. He hadn't spoken to her since Wanja's funeral. She was blind now. But when Kabiro entered her hut, she turned her head toward him before he even spoke. "You brought them back, didn't you?" Kabiro froze. "You see them too," he whispered. "I don't need eyes to see those children," she said. "They carry the smell of the other side. Their parents died. I raised them. I sold my land." "You sold cursed ground," she hissed. "That land was never meant to be owned. Not by us. Not by traders. That was the land of the silent ones." Kabiro remembered the name. Faintly. From tales his grandmother had told him long ago. "They were buried alive by a corrupt king," Nyakoko whispered. 11 children sacrificed during famine. He thought it would bring rain. Kabiro's blood turned to stone. 11. They swore to return. Through children. Through song. Through dreams. Every century they try. Kabiro staggered back. You're saying, the children? They remember. They always remember. That night, Kabiro sat outside Nyumba Ya Roho and stared at the carved symbols Mwikali had etched into the wood. His hands trembled as he ran his fingers over them. Then, without knowing why, he began to hum. It was the same tune Mwikali had sung so many nights. The forest responded. Wind swept across the trees, bending them, not randomly, but deliberately, like they were bowing. The fire beside him went out. And when he turned, all 11 children stood behind him, staring, not blinking. Mwikali stepped forward. You always wanted children, she said gently. Kabiro's lips trembled. I wanted love. And we gave it to you. In the only way we could. He stepped back. What are you? She smiled. We are what your people made us. Kabiro ran. Through the village. Past the fields. Toward the land he once owned. The land now abandoned. The maize had withered. The earth was dry, even though rain had fallen for weeks. But Kabiro kept digging. With his bare hands like a madman. Hours passed. The moon sank. The sun rose. And then, he struck something. An old box. He pulled it out, brushed off the dust, and opened it. Inside were 11 clay masks, worn and cracked. Each had names written beneath. Names he had never told anyone, names of the children. Mwikali. Kuryuki. King. Muraso. Kabiro screamed. When he got back to Nyumba Ya Roho, the children were gone. The hut was empty. No voices, no beds. Just the carved symbols glowing faintly like embers. On the wall was a message, scrawled in fresh charcoal. You gave us a home when the world had forgotten us. For that we leave you in peace. But never speak of us again. Kabiro wept, not out of fear, but out of love, and grief, and confusion. He never saw the children again. But sometimes, late at night, villagers said they could hear laughter coming from the forest. And a man's voice singing lullabies. Kabiro became a legend. Some say he went mad. Some say he was chosen. But 20 years later, a new chief rose in Dengwa. He sent men to cut down trees in Ingumbi Damu, to build roads and homes. The trees bled red. The workers vanished. All that remained were 11 small footprints, burned into the soil. And in the center a wooden plaque. The same one Kabiro had carved long ago. Nyumba Ya Roho. The House of Spirit. Long before Kabiro ever set foot in Dengwa, the land where Nyumba Ya Roho would one day stand was already feared. The elders called it Shamba Kimya. The field of silence. No birds sang there. No animals grazed. And when the wind blew through the bamboo, it didn't whistle. It whispered names. Children's names. 200 years before Kabiro's time, the land was ruled by a cruel king named Mfam Joka. He wore a golden mask, said to be forged from the teeth of a crocodile god. His kingdom suffered a terrible drought. So he summoned a witch doctor from the mountains, Baba Wamiaka, who told him that the land thirsted not for water, but for innocence. To bring rain, he said, you must bury 11 children beneath the bamboo roots, while they still breathe. The king obeyed. 11 children from 11 tribes. All under 10. They were paraded through the streets in white robes, heads shaved, mouths sewn shut with thread made from vulture feathers. As they were buried alive in a sacred pit at Ingumbi Damu, their mothers wailed until they tore their own clothes. Then came the rain. But the rain never stopped. 11 children from 11 tribes. All under 10. They were paraded through the streets in white robes, heads shaved, mouths sewn shut with thread made from vulture feathers. As they were buried alive in a sacred pit at Ingumbi Damu, their mothers wailed until they tore their own clothes. Then came the rain. But the rain never stopped. A young herbalist named Naila, pregnant and widowed, left a message carved into a stone at the edge of the forest. The king thought he planted sacrifice. But he planted rage. And from it, 11 spirits grew. Her baby was the only child born in the kingdom that year. She named him Roho, Spirit. and she vanished into the forest, singing lullabies to the trees. Back in Kabiro's time, decades after the events of Part 2, a curious child from a neighboring village wandered into the forbidden forest. He found an old wooden sign half buried in moss. He dusted it off. It read, "The house remembers. The roots never forget." And as he turned to leave, he heard 11 footsteps behind him. As the sun began to set over the Ingombe Damu, the village of Ndengwa started to feel the weight of something ancient, something unseen. Kabiro could feel the pulse of the land beneath his feet, an unsettling rhythm that seemed to echo through his chest, each thud more urgent than the last. It was the curse of the 11, as Nyakoko had warned him. And now it was awakening. The night Kabiro dug up the masks from the abandoned land, he had a dream that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In it, he saw the silent ones, the children buried under the king's order. They were no longer children, not in the way he knew them. They were shadows, hollow eyes, hollow voices, faces twisted in eternal agony. They walked toward him, their arms outstretched, silent as always. Kabiro tried to scream, but no sound escaped. They placed their hands on his shoulders, and he felt the weight of their sorrow, their anger. The very ground beneath him cracked open, and he fell. When Kabiro woke, drenched in sweat, he knew something was wrong. The children were changing. Mwikali, once innocent and playful, had grown colder, her eyes sharp as daggers. She no longer smiled at Kabiro. Kariuki, the boy with the quick laughter, no longer spoke at all. And Aking, who had once hummed softly in her sleep, was now eerily quiet, her body rigid as if frozen in time. They weren't just children anymore. They were the silent ones, walking among them. It was Nyakoko who finally gave Kabiro the answer. "Do you know why they never speak?" she asked, sitting by the fire one evening. "Why they never blink? Because they are not supposed to be alive." Kabiro's heart sank. "They were cursed," Nyakoko continued. "Not just by the king but by the land itself. The earth could not bear their sacrifice. They were forged in darkness, and they belong to the dark." "What do you mean?" Kabiro asked, his voice trembling. "The sacrifice didn't end when the king died," Nyakoko explained. "It carried on. The spirits of the children have been feeding on the souls of the living, changing them." "They feed on us?" Kabiro asked, his eyes wide. "No," Nyakoko said gravely. "They don't feed. They take." The next day, Kabiro found that the village was starting to change too. Crops grew twisted and malformed, while trees began shedding bark like flesh, revealing pale, skeletal trunks. A thick fog had rolled in from the forest, obscuring the village at all times of day, as if the land itself was trying to hide what was happening. In the dead of night, Kabiro could hear the whispers, names. But they weren't the children's names anymore. They were the names of the villagers. In the heart of the forest, Kabiro finally saw them. The silent ones stood in a circle beneath a lone tree, their eyes now fully black, completely devoid of life. And in the center there was a ritual stone, etched with symbols that Kabiro recognized. It was the same stone he had found in his dream. The same one that had begun to crack. A shadow moved across the ground, and Kabiro realized they were waiting for him. Suddenly, the earth trembled, and a voice, no longer a whisper, echoed in his mind. "You must choose. Sacrifice what you hold most dear, or watch the land devour all that you love." The next day, Kabiro stood before the children. His heart pounded as he looked into their black eyes, seeing nothing but an eternal void staring back at him. He held his breath. He knew what he had to do. But deep inside he wondered if it was too late. Could he stop the curse? Or had it already taken root in the very soul of Ndengwa? Kabiro stood in the clearing at the heart of the bamboo forest, his mind racing. The silent ones were moving closer, their black eyes boring into him. Their silence was maddening, almost suffocating. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. He had learned from Nyakoko that there was only one way to stop the curse that had plagued the land for so many generations. Sacrifice. But it was not just any sacrifice, it had to be one from the bloodline. The bloodline of Mfam Joka, the cursed king. Kabiro's hands trembled as the realization struck him. His own blood was tied to the king's. The old woman had warned him that he carried Joka's curse within him. His family's roots were deeply intertwined with the kingdom's dark history. A history that now hung like a noose around his neck. The fog had grown heavier, thicker, as if it had a life of its own. The entire village of Ndengwa was now submerged in the mist, its homes barely visible through the dense wall of white. The only sound was the creaking of the bamboo, stretching and groaning as though it too was in pain. Kabiro's heart pounded as he made his way toward the sacred grove where the Silent Ones had gathered. The ritual stone glowed faintly, as though waiting for him. He felt it, the presence of the land, the spirits, the ancient power. They were all drawn to him now. He had come to the point of no return. As Kabiro knelt at the stone, a voice echoed in his mind. The choice is simple, your life or their souls. Only one can remain. Only one will be free. His chest tightened. He was trapped. The land demanded its sacrifice. But the bloodline of Joka was a curse that could never be undone without the offering of life. The Silent Ones began to circle him, their faces now fully human, except for their eyes which were still empty black voids. One by one they placed their hands on his shoulders. Suddenly Kabiro's vision blurred. A vivid image appeared in front of him. A man. His great-grandfather standing in the same grove, blood dripping from his hands. He was offering something precious. His great-grandfather's face twisted into an agonizing scream, but Kabiro could not hear his voice. All he could hear was the voice of Joka. Sacrifice yourself to free the land, or watch it consume everything you love. Kabiro closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. But there was one more secret Nyakoko had not shared. The curse could not be broken by just any sacrifice. It had to be the king's descendant who willingly gave up their life. That's why the Silent Ones had appeared to him. They were bound to his bloodline, seeking the one who could end their suffering. They had waited for him to come of age, to make the ultimate choice. Kabiro stood up, drawing a deep breath. The fog thickened, the bamboo forest darkened, and he could feel the land itself stir beneath him. The spirits were watching, waiting. It was time. He took a knife, ancient and rusted, from his pouch. He could hear the voices of his ancestors urging him forward. The Silent Ones stepped back as Kabiro placed the blade against his chest. "May the curse end with me," he whispered. With one final, desperate motion, he pierced his heart. The forest trembled as Kabiro collapsed onto the stone. The ground beneath him cracked open, revealing the roots of the bamboo, which seemed to stretch out and pull at his limbs. For a moment everything went silent. The fog lifted, the mist receded, and the stars began to shine once more. But the Silent Ones did not disappear. Instead they gathered around him, their eyes now glowing with a soft, eerie light. One by one they whispered their names. And as Kabiro took his final breath, his body began to dissolve into the earth, becoming one with the land. In the days that followed, the village of Ndengwa slowly began to heal. The fog lifted, the crops grew once again, and the bamboo forest began to retreat. But Kabiro was never seen again. Some say his spirit lives on in the land, guarding it from the curse that nearly consumed everything. Others believe that his sacrifice was not just for the land, but for the spirit of hope, the belief that even in the darkest of times, one man can make a difference. Years later, children would wander into the bamboo grove, telling tales of the House of Spirit, where a young man sacrificed himself to save them all. They say the house still stands, deep in the heart of the forest. And if you listen closely, you can still hear Kabiro's voice in the wind. The Silent Ones are still there, but they no longer wait for a sacrifice. Instead they guard the land.